and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Mark Walton is the CEO of Sensée. He's based in Shrewsbury in the UK, and Sensée is one of the leading work-from-home customer service specialists in Europe, with 17 years' experience of managing work-from-home customer service solutions. Thanks to this long experience of managing work-from-home solutions for a long period of time before the pandemic, Sensée has a rather different perspective on how to manage and communicate with people from home, including building that distributed work-from-home culture. In the podcast, Mark looks to the future and the lessons that Sensée learned long before and during the pandemic emergency. Okay, Mark, thanks for appearing on the podcast. It's great to have you here. Now, I saw a recent Sensée blog that coined this term, acceptable professional. And, this was describing the kind of professionalism that you need to work from home. What would you say, or how would you describe the key features are to being acceptable then?
Well, I think it's an interesting concept, first of all, and it's something that we've started talking about because of what's happened over the last 18 months with most organisations. I think it's something in the region of about 90+% organisations have got people working from home in their contact centre space. Prior to that, something that Sensée has always done is been very specific about, and very prescriptive actually, about how people are for us, how people behave for us. It's not just the people that we have working in this environment, it's the technology that they use, and it's their physical environment. So that we're always, when we onboard somebody, we're onboarding three elements: tech, people, and their physical environment. We had to be very prescriptive like that because our clients were so nervous, because when home working wasn't really a thing, prior to the COVID outbreak, clients were very nervous around, how were their customers going to be managed, how secure was it, etc. Because we were ISO 27001 business, PCI level 1, all of that stuff. GDPR was a very important part of it. So we had to be super careful and super rigid, I think, actually, in terms of how people had to be. What's happened over the last 18 months is, I think people have got more relaxed. I think people have got used to seeing people at home, working from home. They've got used to people coming in and seeing people in the background on cam, and that was all fine with the flexibility that people were having to allow to happen as people were working from home to keep businesses moving. Everyone did a marvellous job. But again, what's happened is now we're moving into a different phase whereby I think the general public are less forgiving of bad service. We're getting back to normal. I think businesses, whichever form of hybrid working they're using, so we can talk a bit more about that as we move on. I think they are moving back to a business as usual, whatever usual is, and I think organisations do want that level of professionalism to come back. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question, of saying I think the world is going to be slightly more relaxed. People aren't wearing ties anymore. I haven't seen anyone wear a tie for ages, but I think it's not going to be as relaxed as it was, and I think that's why we have to keep standards up, and we have to make sure that it is very professional, and we've got very specific guidelines around what that new professionalism is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's clear that when there was an emergency response, people were very forgiving of the dogs and the kids in the background and all that kind of stuff. But it seems that what you're really saying is that emergency response is over. It's time to get professional. No more hoodies on calls. Unfortunately, people can't see me on this call.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think the world is ever going to be the same again in lots and lots of different ways, and in every aspect actually of our lives. I think the world is different post-COVID to the way it was before COVID. But I think professionalism has to be there. I think we have to be delivering good service. Obviously, have to be delivering secure service, and we, as the leaders in home working throughout the pandemic period and prior to that, obviously we've been doing this for about 17 years now. So we're trying to lead the way in terms of helping organisations to understand what is going to be the new acceptable. And I think that's not just our opinion. That's been based on the fact that we've done an awful lot of research, continually talking to the FTSE 250 businesses. We've surveyed about 150 of them several times over the period of the pandemic. So we understand where organisations are heading, where they're thinking, and also what we're all people, we're all customers, we're all members of the public, what we expect and what we want. So very much so. I don't think it's ever going to go back to the way it was, but I do think that we are going to, as a lot of organisations, at least 50% of organisations are going to have people working from home moving forward. And most of the research that we've looked at and done ourselves indicates that about 85% of businesses are going to be operating some kind of hybrid. And in that scenario, you don't want to be offering two classes of service. You certainly don't want to be treating home workers as second-class citizens, etc. So you do have to have guidelines and standards. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you were doing this before the emergency response, and when we actually had the COVID emergency, like March last year, there were stories in the business press endlessly about companies rushing out and buying laptops and sending people home. But it sounds like they worried about the security later. So I mean, what is the sort of typical home setup for you? I mean, what kind of standards do you enforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is exactly what happened. I think business generally did an incredible job. So it got people working from home. It got the telephony to their homes. It got tech to their homes and enabled them to do the basics. And to a large extent, a lot of the regulatory bodies relaxed, I think, because it was accepted we were in the middle of a crisis. But all the different regulators now, whether it's Ofgem, Ofcom, the Information Commission, whoever it is, FCA, the actual requirements haven't relaxed, they haven't changed, and very quickly businesses are going to need to get to grips with that. So from our own point of view, what we do is we look at a whole raft of things. As I mentioned earlier on, we look at the individual to make sure the individual is appropriate and right for home working, and indeed that home working is right for them. We look at their physical environment because we haven't suddenly been relinquished of our health and safety obligations. From a data security point of view, they have to work in a secure environment where people can't overlook screens, where data isn't visible. So all of those things still have to happen, and they do need to be very clear. So we have a checklist which covers a whole raft of things, such as advice on what they wear if they're doing physical, video type activity, what the video background is, so that there's consistency if they're on webcam, etc. Good levels of background noise, and what I mean by that is, you don't constantly want to hear dogs barking, babies crying, lawnmowers outside, etc. Timekeeping is absolutely essential, so we monitor that to the minute, and it's very important that people are online when they're supposed to be. Tone of voice, tone of communication, connectivity speaks for itself, but you've got to have good broadband. You can't have broadband that's dropping out. Has to be touched earlier on around privacy, but it has to be private. You can't have people working in shared spaces from a data security perspective. You can't have people working off the backs of sofas and off ironing boards, because it's just not comfortable, it's not right. So health and safety is a very important part of that. And then the technology around security is crucial. So how do you make sure you're securing all your customer data, especially where payments are concerned, has to be completely as secure as it would be if people were in a physical contact centre. And then also, obviously, the equipment that people are using. You mentioned earlier on companies buying laptops, etc. We at Sensée run a bring your own device and provide your own connectivity scenario. And that has to all be checked from a security point of view, but also from a capability point of view, to make sure it enables each of our colleagues and employees to do the job that they need to do. So, yeah, a whole raft of things, and security and compliance and regulatory adherence is going to become more and more important as we move forward.
And so that's a big checklist, but how do you ensure that people working remotely follow these guidelines then?
Well, it all really starts with recruitment. So we have a very intensive recruitment process. So people in our world can live anywhere in the UK and Ireland. And we recruit people purely on, are they right to do the job, rather than can they get into an office, have they got access to everything we do is virtual, training, onboarding, the whole lot. And because of that, we have to go through a very intensive recruitment and onboarding process to check the individual is right. But also that the job is right for the individual. People, there was a honeymoon period, clearly, when COVID first struck, and it was a bit novel and the weather was nice and everyone was working from home. And there was a sort of 3-month uplift, I think. But after that, organisations very quickly realised that people could, if home working wasn't suitable for them, they very quickly could get disenfranchised, demotivated. A lot of people suffered with mental health issues, etc. So you've got to check that the job is right for the individual and they are right for it. You've got to go through all of the processes, making sure that they've had all the background checks, etc., and reference checking. And again, that's just the individual. In terms of the technical capabilities, for what we do effectively is we use our own clever software that enables us to incorporate our colleagues, our employees' equipment into our virtual environment. So we then effectively take control of that machinery and that technology environment. And then to make sure that people are operating a clean desk policy, that they've got a room with a window and natural light, that it is secure, that it has got a closable door, that the background levels of noise, etc., are acceptable. We use our own technology and our own webcams and continual listening to make sure that works very well. So you can operate a totally secure environment in this space, and our view is that this should be at least as secure as it would be if people were in the physical contact centre. But it's not just about security, it's also about communication. So enable people to have at least as much access that they would to their managers and to floor walkers and to their colleagues and their friends, so that it's a nice way to work rather than just a secure way to work.
Yeah, and there's some interesting points there, because you're talking about the security aspects, the process that needs to be followed, as well as the communication and just the culture of being included in a team when you're working from home. It seems that maybe it's easier to either work from an office or work completely from home, but it's more difficult to do hybrid, and that's what a lot of companies say that they're planning to do now. So what given that you've had a long history of working from home as a company, what do you think about the companies saying that they're going to mix and match?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really broad topic, that whole issue of hybrid working, because as every person you ask will give you a slightly different response in terms of what hybrid working is. So is it home workers and office workers, contact centre workers? Is it people doing a bit of both? Is it people doing a bit of both and working one or the other on regular intervals, mix and matching? Very, very varied in terms of the response to that. Our view, I think, is that the important thing is not trying to force a way of working onto any individual. So it's to enable people to work in a way that suits them. Some people will never be right for home working, partly for practical reasons. They might not have the space to do it, a secure space to do it. sometimes for reasons of temperament. They just might be really physically sociable. They want to get in amongst people. Flip side of that is, a lot of our workforce are registered disabled. A lot of people have challenges with things like agoraphobia, etc. So they'll never be right for going back into the office or going into an office. And I think what's happened over the last 18 months is everybody's had a look at different ways of working. And we've all realised now, actually, there's no reason that people really need to be in an office or a contact centre. But every organisation, every management team will have a different view on that. So if you're Goldman Sachs, you completely disagree with what I just said and you want 100% of people back in the office. Or if you're us, you think, you can do it all and everybody can be based from home. So I think what we would say is that it's about appropriateness for the individual, firstly. It's obviously got to fit the business model. So, if it's a building site, people can't work from home. It's as simple as that. But you then need to make sure that the people working from home and the people working in the office, regardless of where they are, have the same experience. So we did this prior to COVID. We spent the last 17 years perfecting this, is to make sure that everybody virtually has the same experience as anybody who is in a physical office or contact centre environment. So it's back to that point. We've got a platform we call Live Desk, which it means that it's completely irrelevant where people are actually sitting, because they can see their manager can see them, they can chat to their colleagues, they can go out and have a chat, what would be at a physical water cooler or a virtual water cooler. They can do their social stuff after work. Floor walking, I think, is incredibly important in a contact centre environment. And it's great to be able to get instant access to a floor walker, whether you're working from home, whether you're in the contact centre in Sheffield, or indeed the contact centre in South Africa. So it's the same experience. And by using Live Desk, we replicate that. So most importantly, it's not allowing home workers to become second-class citizens.
Yeah, that point there is exactly what I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned before that there's a danger if the communication is better inside an office than for the remote workers, then you end up with a sort of second-class work experience. Are we saying that you can actually have a professional career working from home, and these are not low-value jobs? They're just flexible.
Yeah, exactly. So if we stop getting so hung up on the physicality of it, and I think all businesses have had a taste of this over the last 18 months, whether they're senior level management roles or whether they're contact centre roles, whatever sort of roles they are, whether they're agents, advisors or whoever, it doesn't actually matter. It's how you do it rather than where you do it. And you said that there's a slightly lessened experience if you're not in the office. Communication isn't quite as good. I would disagree with that, because I think if you take that floor walker as a great example, if you're in a physical contact centre and there are floor walkers walking around helping people, physically going and standing up next to them when they see the hand go up, what happens is, firstly, that individual has to get spotted by the floor walker. There has to be a floor walker available, and then the floor walker will go over, all of which takes time, and then they will have a conversation with that individual, and the information disseminated is just between those two individuals. The virtual environment offers the opportunity, and we do it through, as I mentioned, through our tool called Live Desk, that the response can be far more instant through a virtual floor walker. So it's a virtual hand up, effectively, and that can be through text, or it can be through video. The interaction between the floor walker and the advisor or the agent can then be seen through threaded chat, so everybody can have instant access to that particular response and that particular challenge, and then everybody else can comment on it. So you can have a much more rapid, enriched, engaging process just with floor walkers. I think there are some challenges. clearly through, we'll all have seen, we've all used Teams, we're using Teams now, but Teams, Zoom, everybody has been using these tools through lockdown. And they're great. They're great for small groups. They're great for situations where you can arrange a meeting, arrange a conversation, but they are not a place. So we've created an occasion here to have this conversation. It's not a physical place. It's not a virtual place. And that's what Live Desk does, is it enables people to always be in that virtual place to communicate better. And that's our view. So, yeah, as I said, we've been doing it for 17 years for some of the biggest brands in the UK. And generally speaking, the customer experience is better. It is lower cost, although that's not the main reason for doing it. It can be much more flexible, so you enable people to work at times that suit them and at times when businesses need them, because that's where the peaks are, etc. So it can be a better way of doing things. It doesn't have to be a second best make, do and mend or a business continuity solution, you know.
Yeah, and this year there was some research published by INSEAD in Paris that pretty much backed up exactly what you've just said, that if you have a system that is allowing real-time communication with peers and managers, then you can actually create a better experience virtually. And the reality is that many people don't have all these amazing, innovative water cooler conversations. They actually hate the office politics.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's back to that point of some people like it, some people don't. Some people like a bit of it, and some people would like less of it. So yeah, it is really about the appropriateness of how that happens. But you've only got to think of a training situation. So what's quite interesting is that a lot of the businesses that we are working with at the moment are embracing their own staff working from home, but they haven't quite got it. So they're still saying, but of course, you're going to have to come in for training. And the minute you do that, you've suddenly lost half the benefits of home working, because you suddenly, even if it's only at the beginning, those people have still got to be able to get into a physical office or a contact centre for training. So it really does need to be fully embraced to work properly. And in our world, everything is done virtually. Training is done virtually. We operate some of our most complex client-related activity, health claims business, 9-week training programs, all of which is virtual. But in that scenario, you can actually do it in a way whereby it's more engaging. You can do larger training groups. You can give each individual intensive support and coaching alongside without interrupting the rest of the group, again using clever technology that we've developed. And in our virtual training rooms, there is no place for people to just hide or go quiet or get overlooked and neglected. So you can make it a much more engaging experience. Same when you think about issues around planning. Home working can provide people with true flexibility. So if you do a kind of a heat map or a call arrival pattern into any contact centre, they can be very peaky depending on the industry, and you never need the same amount of people at 9:30 in the morning as you do at 10:30 in the morning and at lunchtime, etc. But you can't suddenly send people home or put everyone off on breaks just because it's not busy anymore. If you use home working and 30-minute scheduling, which is what Sensée has perfected, it means you can do exactly that. So you can have people working the hours that suit them, but also the hours that they need to be there for the customer when the customer demands that. And it saves having huge queues building up. It saves having lots of people sat around when there's no work for them to do, and it suddenly becomes much more efficient. So again, by 30-minute scheduling rather than shift planning, you can really truly embrace the benefits of home working.
Yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of people talking about that this year, and not just about sending people home to work an 8-hour shift, but actually becoming more genuinely flexible, both for the client and for the employee who's there at home.
Yeah. So we're all seeing it at the moment, actually, as the recruitment market gets tougher. Obviously, since Brexit, there's about 1.3 million people fewer workforce actually in the economy to employ. And as the economy opens up, I think most businesses are struggling with recruitment at the moment. a lot of individuals have had some kind of epiphany over the last 18 months and realize, actually, do I want to go and sit in a physical office 5 days a week for 8 hours? And so people are becoming more demanding and wanting more flexibility. So in that scenario, isn't it great to be able to say to people, okay, when do you want to work? What hours suits you? Okay, you can only do 5 hours a day and you want to do them then. Well, that's fine, because we can incorporate that into our overall model. And you work when it suits you, and we'll utilize what you want to deliver for us. And we're both happy, you know.
Yeah, that's a great point. There was about 1 million people quit their job in June in the United States, and the number one reason is this kind of epiphany around wanting flexibility. So I think that, you know, this is not just anecdotal. We're now starting to see it showing up in the labour stats as well.
There was a survey in the UK press just this weekend, which I read, which said 51% of all 18 to 30-year-olds are currently considering or looking for a job change, a role change. And that's kind of what's happened. You know, the world isn't going to be the same now as it was before 18 months ago. So I think that employers have got to think about different ways of working. I was on a call only last week with one of the biggest telecom providers in the UK, and they were flagging up, as they're trying to get people back into the contact centre, actually, that they were flagging up challenges that they hadn't foreseen. So in lockdown, a lot of people have sold their cars. And I just hadn't thought about that. But of course, how are these people going to get back into work now? They're going to have to start working around public transport. And so things that we haven't even thought about are going to be cropping up over the next 3 or 4 months, I think.
Okay, that's great. And so then just as a final point then, what's coming next for Sensée? I saw in the news that you just made a big hiring announcement. So it seems that growth is returning then.
Yeah, I mean, because we've been doing this for a long time, thankfully, we've got, I wouldn't be so complacent to say that we've got recruitment completely sorted, but in terms of virtual recruitment, I think we are in a better place than most organisations, and that's the first thing. So we've got access to a great labour market. We provide roles that people like and are happy with, and one of the reasons that we provide such good service for our clients is because our staff like working for us. They're happy. You go onto the peer review sites and they say great things about us, and we get good scores. So that's all good. So I think we're delivering a good product. We are growing very rapidly, and what we're trying to now do is to move into other spaces. So that probably forms two key areas. The first is, how do we provide higher skilled, more multi-skilled, perhaps more niche service individuals on behalf of our clients? So, you know, if you need a really difficult skill set to get out volume, well, we can do that because of the way that we recruit, train, on board, and because people like working for us, and because we're, you know, reasonable payers and the conditions are pretty good. It means that we can get higher caliber individuals effectively to work on behalf of our clients. We can pull some really good people into our network. So it is about growth. It is about moving into new areas. But the other side of growth for us really is around technology. So we've spent the last 18 months making our technologies much more user-friendly and making them available to any organisation out there that wants to use them as software as a service, so that they too can get their own people up and running, working from contact centre, working from home, or working flexibly between the two in a hybrid environment, but optimally. So how do you recruit? How do you train? How do you onboard? How do you schedule? How do you enable to communicate? All of that stuff. So we're really investing heavily in our software as a service to enable companies to have their own people working from home. We're not just an outsourcer now. We're a true hybrid specialist is how we are really focusing our efforts.
Thanks for downloading the CX Files podcast. If you have a moment, please give us a star rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, because this really helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, or ideas, people, or topics, then please just find myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan on LinkedIn and send a suggestion.